I was standing in my garage on a freezing January morning in Boulder, Colorado, admiring the geothermal heating system I just finished installing when Patricia Drummond from the HOA marched up my driveway with that familiar look of self-righteous fury plastered across her face. "Marcus Johnson, what on earth is that monstrosity in your yard?" Patricia demanded, pointing at the ground loop manifold I'd installed near my property line. She was clutching her tablet like it was some kind of legal weapon, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the screen with increasing irritation. I wiped my hands on my work jeans and took a deep breath. "It's a geothermal heating and cooling system, Patricia. Completely legal, permitted by the city, and it's going to cut my energy bills by about 70%. "I don't care if it prints money," she snapped, her voice rising an octave. Section 12. Paragraph 4 of the HOA covenant clearly states that no mechanical system shall be visible from the street or neighboring properties. You have 48 hours to remove it, or we'll be filing a lien against your property. I felt my jaw tighten. I'd lived in Meadowbrook Heights for 3 years, and Patricia had made it her personal mission to make my life miserable from day one. First, it was the color of my mailbox. Then it was my lawn being a quarter-inch too tall. Last month, she tried to fine me because my garbage cans were visible from the street for exactly 4 minutes past the designated retrieval time. "Patricia, the manifold is barely 18 inches tall, and it's behind my fence. You can only see it if you're deliberately looking over the barrier." "Rules are rules, Marcus," she said, crossing her arms. "The board voted unanimously last night. Remove it or face the consequences." "The board voted without me present. I'm a homeowner. I have a right to attend those meetings." "We sent an email notification 2 hours before the meeting, which is all that's required per our bylaws." She turned on her heel and started walking away, then paused. "Oh, and we're also assessing a $500 fine for unauthorized construction. You'll receive the official notice in the mail." I watched her retreat to her pristine white Lexus, fury building in my chest. I'd spent 3 months planning this system, gotten all the proper permits from the city, hired licensed contractors, and done everything by the book. The system wasn't just an investment in my property. It was an investment in sustainability. Boulder was known for its environmental consciousness, and I thought my neighbors would appreciate the effort. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing every page of the HOA covenant. My background as a mechanical engineer meant I was pretty good at reading technical documents, and I was determined to find a loophole. The problem was that Patricia wasn't entirely wrong. The covenant was written in the mid-90s, and it had language that could be interpreted broadly enough to cover almost anything. My phone rang. It was Tom Peters, my neighbor from 2 houses down. "Hey Marcus, I heard about Patricia's latest crusade," Tom said. "Listen, I'm on your side, man. That geothermal system is brilliant. I've been thinking about installing one myself." "Thanks, Tom, I appreciate that, but I don't know what I'm going to do. I've already invested $23,000 in this system. I can't just tear it out." "Have you talked to a lawyer?" "That's my next step. I'm calling David Morrison in the morning. He handled my house closing, so he's familiar with the HOA documents." "Good plan. And Marcus, you should know that not everyone on the board agrees with Patricia. Linda Chen seems pretty reasonable, and I think Marcus Reed has been getting tired of Patricia's power trips." After I hung up, I spent another hour documenting everything. Photographs of the installation from multiple angles, copies of all my city permits, receipts for the work, and a detailed timeline of events. If this was going to turn into a legal battle, I wanted to be prepared. The next morning, I met with David Morrison at his office in downtown Boulder. He was a calm, methodical attorney in his mid-50s who specialized in property law. "Marcus, I've reviewed the covenant language, and here's the situation," David said, leaning back in his leather chair. "The HOA does have broad authority to regulate exterior modifications. However, they're required to act reasonably and consistently. Have they enforced this rule against other homeowners? Not that I know of. Half the houses in the neighborhood have solar panels, which are definitely visible from the street." David's eyebrows raised. "That's interesting. Solar panels would fall under the same covenant language. If they've allowed those but are targeting your geothermal system, we might have a selective enforcement argument. What are my options? We can request a formal hearing before the board, present your case, and see if we can get them to reconsider. If that fails, we can file a lawsuit arguing selective enforcement and unreasonable interpretation of the covenant. Colorado law is actually fairly protective of property owners in HOA disputes, especially when it comes to energy-efficient improvements." "How long would a lawsuit take?" "Could be anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, depending on how aggressively they fight. And it'll cost you at least $10,000 in legal fees, probably more." I felt my stomach sink. So basically, I'm screwed either way. Either I remove a perfectly good system, or I drain my savings fighting the HOA. "There is one other thing," David said, pulling out another document. "Colorado House Bill 211229, passed in 2021, specifically protects homeowners who install energy-efficient systems. The law prohibits HOAs from completely banning solar, wind, electric vehicle charging stations, and geothermal systems. They can regulate placement and appearance, but they can't impose unreasonable restrictions that make installation impractical or cost prohibitive. So they can't actually force me to remove it. In theory, no. But they can try, and you'd have to fight them on it. The law is relatively new, and there haven't been a ton of court cases interpreting it yet. What I can do is send them a letter citing the statute and demanding they rescind their removal order. That might scare them off. Let's do it." David drafted a letter that afternoon, and by the next day, it was in Patricia's hands. I thought that might be the end of it, but I'd severely underestimated her stubbornness. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney, a firm called Stevenson and Associates. The letter acknowledged the Colorado statute, but argued that my system violated the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood, and that the HOA had the authority to require me to screen it from view or relocate it to a less visible position. "This is insane," I told David over the phone. "They're moving the goalposts. First, it was about removing it. Now it's about screening or relocation. Do they not understand how geothermal systems work? You can't just move the ground loops wherever you want. They have to be positioned based on soil composition, sun exposure, and distance from the heat pump." "I know, Marcus, but this is what HOAs do. They'll keep shifting their arguments until they find something that sticks. We need to request that formal hearing and present the technical requirements of your system. If we can show that their demands are impractical or would destroy the system's efficiency, we've got a strong case." The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, on a Wednesday evening in late January. I spent those 3 weeks preparing a presentation that would make even the most stubborn board member understand why my system was positioned exactly where it needed to be. I also did some investigating. I drove around the neighborhood, photographing every visible mechanical system, solar panel, and exterior modification I could find. I counted 23 homes with solar panels, 7 with visible air conditioning condensers in front yards, and 3 with propane tanks that were far more obtrusive than my ground loop manifold. I compiled everything into a binder that I planned to present at the hearing. The night of the hearing arrived with temperatures dropping to 15 degrees. I showed up at the community center 15 minutes early, my presentation materials in hand. The board consisted of 5 members: Patricia Drummond as president, Linda Chen as vice president, Robert Reed as treasurer, Susan Walsh as secretary, and Greg Thompson as a general member. About 20 other homeowners showed up, which surprised me. I recognized Tom Peters and several other neighbors I'd chatted with over the years. Patricia called the meeting to order with her usual air of superiority. We have one primary item on tonight's agenda: the unauthorized installation of mechanical equipment at 1247 Spruce Lane, the property of Marcus Johnson. Mr. Johnson, you have 20 minutes to present your case. I stood up and distributed copies of my presentation to each board member. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I want to start by addressing the claim that my installation was unauthorized. As you can see from the documents I've provided, I obtained all required permits from the City of Boulder. The installation was inspected and approved by licensed city inspectors. I also notified the HOA of my plans 3 months ago via email to the general HOA account. Patricia interrupted. We never received any such email. I have the sent confirmation right here, I said, holding up my phone. It was sent on October 15th at 2:30 p.m. Linda Chen spoke up. Patricia, I think I remember seeing that email. I thought you were going to respond to it. Patricia's face flushed slightly. I receive hundreds of emails. I can't be expected to remember every single one, I continued. The geothermal system I installed is designed to heat and cool my home using the Earth's natural thermal properties. It's one of the most efficient heating systems available, and it will reduce my carbon footprint by approximately 75% compared to traditional natural gas heating. The system consists of underground pipes, called ground loops, that circulate a water-based solution. These loops need to be buried at a specific depth and in a specific configuration to work properly. I pulled out a diagram showing the layout of my property and the placement of the ground loops. The loops are positioned in my backyard and extend slightly toward the side yard because that's where the soil composition is ideal. The only visible component is this small manifold, which is 18 inches tall and located behind my fence. It's necessary to have access to the manifold for maintenance purposes. The covenant clearly states that mechanical systems must not be visible, Patricia said firmly. And yet, I've documented 23 homes in this neighborhood with highly visible solar panels. I've also found 7 homes with air conditioning units in front yards and 3 with propane tanks. Here are the addresses and photographs. I handed her the binder I'd prepared. Patricia barely glanced at it. Those are grandfathered installations or were approved by previous boards. Actually, Patricia, that's not accurate, Linda Chen said, looking at the binder. The Hendersons installed their solar panels just last year, and we approved them without any conditions. And the Martinses put in that AC unit 3 months ago. I don't remember us requiring them to screen it. This is different, Patricia insisted. Solar panels are commonly accepted. This geothermal system is unusual and could set a precedent we don't want. A precedent for energy efficiency, I asked. Colorado law, specifically House Bill 211229, protects homeowners who install renewable energy systems. The law prohibits HOAs from imposing unreasonable restrictions. requiring me to remove or relocate a system that cost $23,000 and is functioning exactly as designed is unreasonable. Robert Reed, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. Marcus, what would it take to screen this manifold? Could you build a small enclosure around it? I could, but it would restrict airflow and make maintenance more difficult. The manifold needs to be accessible because the pressure gauges and valves need to be checked monthly. Building an enclosure that's both accessible and aesthetically pleasing would cost several $1,000s, and it would compromise the system's efficiency. Several thousand seems excessive for a simple screen, Patricia said dismissively. Patricia, have you ever installed a mechanical system? I asked, trying to keep my tone respectful. The manifold isn't just a box. It has multiple pipes, valves, and sensors. Any enclosure would need to allow for expansion and contraction due to temperature changes, provide weather protection, and still allow easy access. We're not talking about putting up a picket fence. The discussion went back and forth for another 30 minutes. Tom Peters spoke in my favor, pointing out that the neighborhood should be encouraging sustainable improvements. Another neighbor, Jennifer Mills, agreed, saying she'd been impressed by my commitment to the environment, but Patricia wouldn't budge. She kept returning to the covenant language and insisting that rules had to be followed, regardless of the circumstances. Finally, Linda Chen suggested a compromise. What if we table this decision for 1 month? That would give us time to research the state law Marcus mentioned and consult with our attorney about whether we're on solid legal ground. It would also give Marcus time to explore screening options that might satisfy both parties. I agree with Linda, Robert Reed said. This seems like a complex issue, and I don't think we should make a hasty decision. Patricia looked irritated but nodded. Fine. We'll table it until next month's meeting. But Mr. Johnson, understand that this is not an approval. You are not to proceed with any additional installation work until this matter is resolved. I left the meeting feeling frustrated but slightly hopeful. At least I'd bought myself some time. Over the next few weeks, I worked with a local fabricator to design a screening solution that would satisfy the board while maintaining the system's functionality. It was expensive and, in my opinion, completely unnecessary, but I was willing to compromise if it meant ending this fight. Then everything changed. On February 10th, Boulder was hit by a massive winter storm. Temperatures plummeted to -8 degrees, with wind chills reaching -25. It was the coldest snap we'd seen in a decade, and the storm knocked out power to thousands of homes across the region. My geothermal system, which runs on electricity but stores thermal energy in the ground, kept my house at a comfortable 68 degrees even when the power went out for 6 hours. I'd installed a backup battery system along with the geothermal unit, which meant I had heat, lights, and even hot water while most of the neighborhood was freezing. Around 8 p.m., there was a frantic knocking on my door. I opened it to find Susan Walsh, the HOA secretary, standing on my porch with her 2 young kids. They were bundled in winter coats and blankets, but I could see they were shivering. Marcus, I'm so sorry to bother you, but our heat is out and the power company says it might be another 6 hours before they restore service. The kids are freezing, and I didn't know where else to go. Could we possibly stay here until the power comes back? Of course, come in, I said immediately, stepping aside. Let me get you some hot chocolate. Susan and her kids, Emma and Tyler, settled in my living room. I made hot chocolate and brought out some blankets. Within 15 minutes, the kids had stopped shivering and were playing with some board games I'd pulled from my closet. This system of yours really works, Susan said, looking around. It feels like summer in here. That's the beauty of geothermal. The temperature 6 feet underground stays constant year-round, around 55 degrees in Colorado. The system transfers that heat into the house during winter and pulls heat out during summer. Even with the power out, the thermal mass in the ground keeps things stable. I had no idea. I'm embarrassed to admit I voted to make you remove it. Patricia can be pretty convincing when she wants to be. Susan shook her head. It's not just that. I didn't understand what you were installing. I thought it was something ugly that would bring down property values. But seeing it work like this, keeping your home warm when everyone else is freezing, I realize how wrong I was. Over the next 2 hours, 3 more neighbors showed up at my door. Tom Peters came by with his elderly mother, who had health issues and couldn't tolerate the cold. Jennifer Mills brought her husband and their newborn baby. Even Robert Reed stopped by, looking sheepish but grateful. My house became an impromptu warming shelter. I made coffee, heated up soup, and kept everyone comfortable until the power came back online around midnight. The one person who didn't show up was Patricia Drummond. The next morning, I was shoveling snow from my driveway when Tom Peters came over. "Hey Marcus, have you heard the news?" "What news?" "Patricia's furnace died last night. Not just the power outage, the whole unit failed. Something about a cracked heat exchanger. She's been calling every HVAC company in Boulder, but because of the storm, everyone's backed up. The earliest anyone can get to her is next week." I felt a small surge of satisfaction, followed immediately by guilt. I wouldn't wish a heating emergency on anyone, not even Patricia. "That's rough," I said. "Is she okay?" "Physically, yeah. She went to a hotel last night, but from what I heard, she's absolutely furious. Apparently, her furnace is the original unit from when the house was built in 1998, and it's going to cost $8,000 to replace." Later that afternoon, I saw Patricia's car in her driveway. I debated whether to say anything, but my conscience got the better of me. I walked over and knocked on her door. She opened it wrapped in a heavy coat, her breath visible in the cold air. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I heard about your furnace. I'm sorry you're dealing with that. If you need a warm place to stay while you wait for repairs, my door is open." She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker across her face. Was it gratitude? Embarrassment? I couldn't tell. "I'm fine," she said stiffly. "I'll be staying at the Marriott until my furnace is replaced. The offer stands if you change your mind." I turned to leave, but she called after me. "Marcus, why are you being nice to me? After everything I've put you through," I turned back. "Because we're neighbors, Patricia, and because having a warm, safe home shouldn't be a privilege. Everyone deserves that." She didn't respond, just closed the door softly. The storm had lasted 3 days, and by the time it cleared, the entire dynamic in Meadowbrook Heights had shifted. People who'd been indifferent to my geothermal system were suddenly asking me questions about installation costs, efficiency ratings, and whether their properties would support similar systems. Susan Walsh called me a week after the storm. "Marcus, I wanted to give you a heads up. The board is meeting tomorrow night for our regular monthly meeting. Patricia has decided not to pursue the removal order for your system." "Really? What changed her mind?" "Honestly, I think it was a combination of things. The storm showed everyone how effective your system is. Linda and Robert have been pushing back hard against her, arguing that the neighborhood should be encouraging sustainable improvements, not punishing them. And I think Patricia's furnace failure made her realize how vulnerable we all are to heating emergencies." "That's great news. Thank you, Susan." "There's more. We're going to formally amend the HOA covenant to explicitly allow renewable energy systems, including geothermal, solar, and wind power. We'll still have some aesthetic guidelines, but nothing that would make installation impractical. Linda is drafting the amendment now, and we should have it ready for a vote at next month's homeowner meeting. I felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. I appreciate you letting me know. And Marcus, I'm sorry for how I voted before. You were right and I was wrong. That takes courage to admit, but it's the truth. The next evening's board meeting was surprisingly cordial. Patricia read a prepared statement acknowledging that the board had reconsidered its position and would not require me to remove or modify my geothermal system. She didn't apologize exactly, but her tone was significantly less hostile than before. Linda Chen presented the proposed covenant amendment, which received enthusiastic support from the homeowners in attendance. The formal vote would happen at the annual meeting in March, but it was clear the measure would pass easily. As the meeting wrapped up, Patricia approached me. "Mr. Johnson, may I speak with you privately?" We stepped outside into the cold February evening. Patricia looked uncomfortable, her usual confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I've been thinking a lot since the storm. When my furnace failed and I was sitting in a freezing house, I realized how foolish I'd been. You tried to do something innovative and responsible, and I fought you every step of the way because I was more concerned with rules than common sense. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. I've been president of this HOA for 6 years," she continued. "I took the job because I care about this neighborhood. I wanted to maintain our property values and keep Meadowbrook Heights beautiful. But somewhere along the way, I became more focused on control than community. I forgot that we're all just people trying to live our lives." "Patricia, I appreciate you saying that. I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I just wanted you to know that I was wrong and I'm going to do better." Over the next few weeks, Patricia was true to her word. The covenant amendment passed unanimously at the annual meeting. She even worked with Linda Chen to develop guidelines that would encourage sustainable improvements while maintaining reasonable aesthetic standards. But then something unexpected happened that tested the entire neighborhood's character. In late March, as spring was just starting to emerge, my neighbor directly across the street, Harold Martinez, had a massive stroke. He was rushed to the hospital and spent 2 weeks in intensive care. His wife, Rosa, was overwhelmed, trying to manage Harold's medical care while also taking care of their 3 teenage children and maintaining their home. I organized a neighborhood meal train through our community email list. Susan Walsh set up a schedule for yard work and snow removal. Tom Peters, who was a retired accountant, offered to help Rosa sort through the insurance paperwork and medical bills. And Patricia. She spent hours at the hospital with Rosa, providing companionship and support during the scariest time of Rosa's life. "I never thought Patricia had it in her," Tom said to me one evening as we were mowing the Martinez's lawn. "She's been incredibly kind to Rosa." "People can change," I said. "Sometimes they just need the right catalyst." Harold eventually recovered enough to come home, though he faced months of physical therapy. The neighborhood rallied around the Martinez family in ways I'd never seen before. The crisis brought out the best in everyone, including Patricia. One Saturday in mid-April, I was working in my yard when Patricia came over. "Marcus, can I ask you a technical question?" "Sure, what's up?" I had 3 HVAC companies give me quotes for a new furnace. 2 recommended high-efficiency gas units, but 1 suggested I consider a geothermal system. "I know it's more expensive upfront, but given what happened this winter, I'm thinking about making the investment. Would you be willing to share some information about your installation?" I spent the next hour walking Patricia through my system, explaining the installation process, the costs, the maintenance requirements, and the long-term savings. She asked intelligent questions and took detailed notes. "I think I'm going to do it," she said finally. "It makes financial sense, and after this winter, I never want to be caught without heat again. If you decide to move forward, I can recommend the contractor I used. They did excellent work. I'd appreciate that." A few weeks later, Patricia's geothermal installation began. Her system was even more extensive than mine because her house was larger. The installation took 2 weeks, and I helped her navigate some of the technical decisions. By June, Patricia's system was operational, and she couldn't stop talking about how comfortable her house was. She mentioned her lower energy bills at every board meeting and encouraged other homeowners to consider similar upgrades. The transformation in Patricia was remarkable. She was still detail-oriented and organized, but the harsh edge was gone. She started focusing on community-building initiatives rather than enforcement actions. She organized neighborhood barbecues, created a community garden, and even established a fund to help homeowners with emergency repairs. In July, the local newspaper ran a story about Meadowbrook Heights and our adoption of renewable energy systems. The article featured interviews with me, Patricia, and several other homeowners who'd installed geothermal or solar systems. The reporter called our neighborhood a model for sustainable suburban living. "Who would have thought," Tom Peters joked at the 4th of July block party, "that Patricia Drummond would become an environmental champion?" "Character growth is beautiful," I replied, watching Patricia help Rosa Martinez set up chairs for the party. But not everything was perfect. In August, we discovered that the previous HOA treasurer, who'd left the board 2 years earlier, had embezzled nearly $40,000 from the community fund. The discovery came to light when Robert Reed was doing an audit in preparation for a major neighborhood improvement project. The board held an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. The evidence was clear. The former treasurer, Martin Blake, had been writing checks to himself and falsifying the accounting records. "We need to file a police report," Linda Chen said firmly. "This is theft, plain and simple." "I agree," Patricia said. "But we also need to think about the community. That $40,000 was supposed to fund our reserve account for emergency repairs. Without it, we're vulnerable. We should also consult with an attorney about recovering the money," I suggested. "Martin might have homeowners' insurance or assets we can go after." The board voted unanimously to file a police report. 2 days later, Detective Sarah Coleman from the Boulder Police Department came to interview the board members. She reviewed the financial records and confirmed that there was sufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges. "These kinds of cases can take time," Detective Coleman explained. "We'll need to subpoena bank records, conduct interviews, and build a comprehensive case. But based on what I'm seeing here, Mr. Blake committed felony theft." Over the next 3 months, the investigation unfolded. Martin Blake was arrested in October and charged with theft and fraud. He'd used the stolen money to fund a gambling habit, and he'd lost everything at casinos in Black Hawk. The criminal case proceeded through the courts. Martin initially tried to fight the charges, but the evidence was overwhelming. His attorney negotiated a plea deal. Martin would plead guilty to felony theft and agree to pay restitution to the HOA. In December, nearly a year after the winter storm that had changed everything, Martin Blake was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution plus interest. The judge was particularly harsh because Martin had betrayed the trust of his community. This defendant held a position of responsibility, Judge Rebecca Thornton said during sentencing. He had a fiduciary duty to his neighbors, and he violated that duty for personal gain. This sentence reflects the seriousness of that betrayal. After the sentencing, Patricia called an emergency board meeting. We need to talk about how we move forward from this. We've recovered the stolen money through Martin's restitution payments and the insurance claim, but we need to rebuild trust in this community. I think we've already done that, Susan Walsh said. Look at what we've accomplished this year. We've updated our covenant to support sustainable improvements. We've come together as a community. We've held a thief accountable. Those are all positive steps. Susan's right, I added. A year ago, we were fighting about my geothermal system. Now we have 8 homes with geothermal, 15 with solar panels, and a community that actually supports each other. That's real progress. Linda Chen pulled out a proposal she'd been working on. I've been thinking about this a lot. What if we used part of the recovered funds to establish a community emergency assistance program? Something that would help homeowners deal with unexpected repairs or hardships. We could create an application process and a committee to review requests. The idea was met with enthusiasm. Over the next month, we developed a comprehensive program that would provide interest-free loans or grants to homeowners facing genuine emergencies. The program included safeguards to prevent abuse and ensure the money went to legitimate needs. In January, exactly 1 year after the winter storm, we held a special neighborhood meeting to celebrate the anniversary. Nearly every household in Meadowbrook Heights attended. Patricia stood up to address the crowd. A year ago, our community faced a crisis. The storm revealed our vulnerabilities, but it also revealed our strengths. We learned that innovation and sustainability aren't threats to our neighborhood, they're assets. We learned that rules should serve people, not the other way around. And we learned that when we support each other, we can overcome any challenge. She paused, and I saw tears in her eyes. I also learned that I'd lost sight of what really matters. I was so focused on enforcement and control that I'd forgotten we're a community, not a corporation. I'm grateful to all of you for your patience and for giving me a chance to grow. The room erupted in applause. Patricia sat down, wiping her eyes. Tom Peters leaned over and whispered to me, "You know, if you hadn't stood up to her about that geothermal system, none of this would have happened. You changed this whole neighborhood." "It wasn't just me," I replied. "It was everyone." Patricia changed herself. "The storm showed us what was important. Martin's theft forced us to come together. All of those things mattered." The evening continued with food, conversation, and a genuine sense of community that I'd never experienced before. People shared stories about their new renewable energy systems. Rosa Martinez talked about Harold's recovery and how grateful they were for the neighborhood's support. Several families mentioned how the emergency assistance program had helped them through tough times. As the night wound down, I found myself standing outside, looking at the stars. It was cold, but not as brutal as that night a year ago when the storm had hit. My house was warm, my neighbors were friends, and the community I'd once considered leaving had become a place I truly wanted to stay. Patricia came outside and stood beside me. "Penny, for your thoughts. Just reflecting on how much can change in a year." "It's been quite a journey," she agreed. "Marcus, I never properly thanked you for offering me shelter during the storm, even after how I'd treated you. That was grace I didn't deserve." "We all deserve grace, Patricia. We all make mistakes. Some mistakes are bigger than others, but you're right, and I hope I've learned from mine." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, then Patricia spoke again. "You know what the ironic thing is? Your geothermal system, the thing I fought so hard to make you remove, probably saved lives during that storm. Tom's mother has respiratory problems. Susan's kids were dangerously cold. If you hadn't been able to shelter people, someone could have gotten seriously hurt. I hadn't thought about it that way. I have. Many times. It's a reminder that sometimes the things we fight against are exactly what we need. Over the following months, life in Meadowbrook Heights settled into a new normal. More homeowners continued to install renewable energy systems. The Emergency Assistance Program helped 3 families deal with unexpected medical bills and home repairs. Patricia remained HOA president, but with a completely different management style focused on facilitation rather than enforcement. In March, I received a call from a reporter at the Denver Post. They were doing a feature story about sustainable suburban communities, and they'd heard about Meadowbrook Heights. Would I be willing to be interviewed? The resulting article was published in April and attracted significant attention. We received inquiries from HOAs across Colorado, asking how we'd transformed our covenant and built community support for renewable energy. Patricia and Linda created a presentation they gave to several other neighborhoods, sharing our story and offering advice. The most rewarding moment came in May when Susan Walsh called me with news. "Marcus, you'll never guess what happened. The Colorado HOA Forum just awarded Meadowbrook Heights the Innovative Community Award. They recognized us for our sustainable energy initiatives and our community support programs. We're being honored at their annual conference in Denver next month." "That's incredible, Susan. And they specifically mentioned you in the award citation. They said your willingness to stand up for innovation in the face of opposition helped transform not just your own neighborhood, but is inspiring communities across the state." At the award ceremony in June, I stood on stage with Patricia, Linda, Susan, Robert, and Tom Peters. The presenter talked about how Meadowbrook Heights had gone from a typical suburban HOA focused on enforcement to a model community emphasizing sustainability, innovation, and mutual support. "This transformation didn't happen by accident," the presenter said. "It happened because residents like Marcus Johnson had the courage to challenge outdated rules, and leaders like Patricia Drummond had the humility to admit when they were wrong and change course. That combination of courage and humility is rare, and it's what makes Meadowbrook Heights special." After the ceremony, several people approached me asking for advice about their own HOA battles. I shared my story and offered what guidance I could, but I emphasized that every situation was different. "The key," I told one frustrated homeowner from Colorado Springs, "is to stay focused on the facts and the law. Don't make it personal, even when the other side does. Document everything. Be willing to compromise when you can, but stand firm on the important issues. And remember that people can change if you give them the opportunity." In July, Harold Martinez fully recovered from his stroke and threw a party to thank everyone who'd helped during his illness. He gave a moving speech about community and how grateful he was to live in a neighborhood where people genuinely cared for each other. "When I had my stroke, I was terrified," Harold said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Not just for myself, but for Rosa and the kids. How would they manage? How would they keep everything going? But this neighborhood stepped up in ways I never imagined. You mowed our lawn, brought us meals, helped with medical bills, and just provided constant support. That's not just being neighbors, that's being family." Rosa stood beside him, tears streaming down her face. "We'll never forget what you all did for us. Never." As summer turned to fall, I reflected on everything that had happened since that cold January morning when Patricia had demanded I remove my geothermal system. The confrontation that had seemed like a disaster had actually been a catalyst for positive change, not just for me, but for the entire community. My energy bills remained 70% lower than they'd been before the geothermal installation. The system required minimal maintenance and performed flawlessly through both the summer heat and winter cold. But more importantly, it had sparked a broader conversation about sustainability, community values, and what it means to be good neighbors. In October, Patricia announced she wouldn't be seeking re-election as HOA president. "It's time for new leadership," she explained at the board meeting. "I've done what I can do, and I think the community needs fresh perspectives. I'll stay involved, but I want to step back from the day-to-day management." Linda Chen was elected as the new president, with Susan Walsh as vice president. Patricia remained on the board as a general member, offering her organizational skills without dominating the conversation. The transition was smooth, and Linda's first initiative as president was to establish a sustainability committee to continue promoting renewable energy adoption and environmental responsibility throughout the neighborhood. She asked me to chair the committee, and I accepted. By November, 15 homes in Meadowbrook Heights had geothermal systems, 23 had solar panels, and several others had made significant energy efficiency improvements. Our neighborhood's collective carbon footprint had dropped by an estimated 45% in less than 2 years. The financial benefits were equally impressive. Homeowners who'd installed renewable energy systems were saving an average of $1,200 per year on energy costs. Property values in the neighborhood had increased by 8%, partly because of the sustainable improvements and partly because of our reputation as a supportive, well-managed community. In December, 2 years after the winter storm, we held another neighborhood gathering. This time it was a holiday party, and the atmosphere was joyful and warm. I found myself talking with a new resident, Michael Stevens, who just bought the house next to Patricia's. "I have to tell you," Michael said, "the reputation of this neighborhood was a major factor in our decision to buy here. My wife and I researched dozens of communities, and Meadowbrook Heights stood out because of your focus on sustainability and community support. That's exactly what we were looking for. We've worked hard to build that culture," I said, "but it didn't happen overnight and it wasn't always easy. I heard there was some drama a couple years ago about a geothermal system," I laughed. "Yeah, that was my system. It turned into quite a battle, but it worked out in the end." "Well, I'm grateful you fought that battle. We're planning to install solar panels in the spring, and it's nice to know the HOA will support us rather than fight us." As the evening continued, I looked around at my neighbors laughing, sharing food, and genuinely enjoying each other's company. Patricia was deep in conversation with Rosa Martinez about a community garden expansion. Linda Chen was showing Tom Peters photos of her new electric vehicle. Susan Walsh's kids were playing with Harold and Rosa's teenagers. This was what community was supposed to be. Not perfect, not without conflict, but fundamentally supportive and focused on helping each other thrive. Later that night, as I was cleaning up, Patricia stopped by to help. "You know, Marcus, I've been thinking about writing a book about what happened here. Not just the geothermal system battle, but the whole transformation of our community." "That's an interesting idea. What would be the message?" "That rigid adherence to rules can destroy community, but thoughtful adaptation of rules can build it. That sustainability isn't just about the environment, it's about creating systems and relationships that can endure. And that people have an amazing capacity for growth if we give them space and grace to change." "Those are good lessons," I agreed. "You should write it." "Maybe I will. And if I do, I want you to know that you'll be the hero of the story." I shook my head. "I'm not a hero, Patricia. I just stood up for something I believed was right." That's exactly what makes someone a hero, she replied with a smile. As winter settled over Boulder again, I watched the snow fall outside my window while sitting in my comfortably heated living room. The geothermal system hummed quietly in the basement, efficiently transferring the Earth's warmth throughout my home. I thought about that moment 2 years ago when Patricia had demanded I remove the system, when it had seemed like my investment and my principles were about to be crushed by bureaucratic stubbornness. I'd been angry then, frustrated and ready for a fight. But the fight had led to dialogue. The dialogue had led to understanding, and the understanding had led to transformation. Not just for Patricia, but for the entire community. We'd learned that progress requires both courage and flexibility. That standing firm on principles doesn't mean being unwilling to compromise on details. And that the best communities are built on mutual respect rather than rigid enforcement. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda Chen. Just got word that 2 more families are installing geothermal systems in the spring. This is amazing, I smiled and texted back. The revolution continues. And it did. Throughout that winter and into the following spring, the transformation of Meadowbrook Heights continued. More renewable energy systems, more community initiatives, more examples of neighbors helping neighbors. In March, the Sustainability Committee I chaired launched an educational program, offering workshops on energy efficiency, renewable energy options, and sustainable landscaping. The workshops were well attended, with homeowners from neighboring communities often joining us. Patricia became one of our most active workshop volunteers, sharing her experience installing geothermal heating and encouraging others to consider similar improvements. Her testimony was particularly powerful because she spoke honestly about her initial resistance and what had changed her mind. I fought Marcus Johnson when he installed his geothermal system, she told one workshop audience. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, but I was actually holding us back. The storm taught me that true protection comes from preparation and innovation, not from enforcing arbitrary aesthetic rules. If I could go back and do things differently, I would have supported Marcus from the beginning. But since I can't change the past, I'm committed to helping others avoid my mistakes. By May, Martin Blake had served 18 months of his 4-year sentence and was eligible for parole. The parole board contacted our HOA to get input on whether we supported his release. The board held a meeting to discuss how to respond. I think we should support his parole, Patricia said, surprising everyone. He's paid significant restitution, he's completed rehabilitation programs, and by all accounts, he's genuinely remorseful. Keeping him in prison longer doesn't benefit anyone. I agree with Patricia, Linda added. Our community is supposed to be about grace and second chances. Martin made terrible mistakes, but he's taking responsibility for them. We should support his efforts to rebuild his life. The board voted unanimously to support Martin's parole, with conditions that he continue making restitution payments and avoid any involvement in financial management for the HOA. Martin was released in June and moved to Fort Collins to start fresh. He sent a letter to the board thanking us for our support and apologizing again for his actions. That was the right decision, I told Patricia after the meeting. It's consistent with the values we've built in this community. Growth and grace, Patricia said. That's what we're about now. In July, I received an unexpected email from the Colorado governor's office. The governor was establishing a task force on sustainable community development, and they wanted me to serve as a member. The task force would advise state policy on HOA regulations, renewable energy adoption, and community planning. I accepted the appointment and spent the next several months working with policy experts environmental advocates, and community leaders from across Colorado. The work was fascinating and gave me a broader perspective on the challenges and opportunities facing communities throughout the state. The task force's recommendations, released in November, included several proposals inspired by Meadowbrook Heights' experience. Strengthening protections for homeowners installing renewable energy systems, requiring HOAs to adopt sustainability policies, and creating incentives for communities that achieve measurable reductions in carbon emissions. Several of these recommendations were incorporated into legislation introduced in the following session of the Colorado General Assembly. While the political process was slow and complicated, the fact that our community's experience was influencing state policy felt deeply meaningful. In December, 3 years after the winter storm that had changed everything, Meadowbrook Heights held another anniversary celebration. The event had become an annual tradition, a time to reflect on how far we'd come and to set goals for the future. Linda Chen opened the evening with a statistical update. 3 years ago, we had 0 geothermal systems and 8 solar installations in our neighborhood. Today, we have 19 geothermal systems and 31 solar installations. Our collective energy costs have dropped by an average of 42% per household, and our carbon emissions have decreased by 58%. We've transformed from a typical suburban HOA into one of the most sustainable communities in Colorado. The room erupted in applause. But the numbers only tell part of the story, Linda continued. We've also transformed how we relate to each other. Our emergency assistance program has helped 12 families over the past 2 years. Our community garden provides fresh vegetables to 20 households. Our Neighborhood Watch program has reduced property crime to nearly 0. We're not just living near each other, we're living with each other. Patricia stood up to speak next. I want to say something personal. 3 years ago, I was the obstacle to progress in this community. I was so focused on rules and control that I'd lost sight of what really mattered. Marcus Johnson's geothermal system forced me to confront my own rigidity, and I'm grateful for that confrontation. It wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. This community gave me grace when I didn't deserve it. You forgave my mistakes and allowed me to grow. That's a gift I'll never forget, and it's a model I try to apply in every aspect of my life now. Thank you for that gift. The celebration continued with food, music, and storytelling. Children played while adults talked about everything from renewable energy to local politics to upcoming community projects. It was ordinary and extraordinary at the same time, a group of neighbors who genuinely cared about each other, celebrating their shared achievements and looking forward to the future. As the evening wound down, I found myself outside again, looking at the same stars I'd gazed at 2 years earlier. But everything felt different now. The fear and uncertainty were gone, replaced by confidence and hope. Tom Peters joined me. You know, Marcus, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you'd just given in and removed that geothermal system. Would any of this have happened? I doubt it, I said. The transformation required confrontation. If I'd backed down, Patricia would have continued her authoritarian approach. The community would have remained divided, and we'd all still be stuck in old patterns. So sometimes conflict is necessary. Not conflict for its own sake, but standing up for what's right even when it's uncomfortable. The trick is knowing when to stand firm and when to compromise, when to fight and when to extend grace. You make it sound simple, Tom said with a laugh. It's not simple at all. I made plenty of mistakes along the way, but I tried to stay focused on principles rather than personalities, and I think that made a difference. As I walked home that night, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. My geothermal system continued to heat my home efficiently and sustainably. My neighborhood had become a genuine community. My conflict with the HOA had transformed into collaboration and friendship, and my personal stand for innovation had contributed to policy changes affecting communities across Colorado. None of it had been easy. There had been moments of frustration, anger, and doubt, but those difficult moments had been necessary catalysts for growth, both personally and communally. I thought about that freezing January morning 3 years ago when Patricia had demanded I remove my system, and I realized that moment had been a gift, not despite the conflict, but because of it. The confrontation had forced everyone, including me, to examine our assumptions, challenge our comfortable patterns, and grow beyond our limitations. My geothermal system had started as a personal project to reduce my energy costs and environmental impact. But it had become something much larger, a symbol of innovation triumphing over bureaucracy, of community choosing progress over tradition, and of people having the courage and humility to change. As I entered my warm house and locked the door behind me, I smiled. Tomorrow I'd wake up to another day in Meadowbrook Heights, surrounded by neighbors who'd become friends, in a community that had learned to embrace change, and in a home heated by the Earth's endless thermal energy. It was, I reflected, exactly where I wanted to be.